Did you know that the average Maasai warrior can run for hours without stopping, jump higher than most Olympic athletes, and drink a mixture of cow's blood and milk as part of their daily diet? If that doesn't sound like superhero training, I don't know what does. Forget Batman's gadgets or Superman's alien genetics. The Maasai lifestyle itself forges people into real-life endurance machines. And it isn't some Instagram fitness challenge. This is survival, culture, and honor, all blended into daily life. Hey traveler, tonight we're diving into the world of the Maasai tribe, a people who live across Kenya and Tanzania and whose traditions make modern gym workouts look like child's play. So pull up your blanket, settle into your pillow, and let's walk, barefoot of course, into a land where every single day feels like training for a superhero origin story. First, we'll get to know the people themselves. The Maasai aren't just a stereotype of tall, lean warriors in red shukas. They're iconic robes. They're fathers, mothers, herders, singers, dancers, and yes, warriors too. Their culture is built around cattle, community, and rituals that test human limits. But it's not all glamour. Life as a Maasai is tough, sometimes painfully so, and we'll explore both the pride and the struggle in how they live. Then, we'll turn to the land they inhabit. The Great Rift Valley of East Africa is no joke. Lions, elephants, and hyenas roam the same plains where Maasai children grow up playing. Droughts, scorching sun, and dangerous predators mean that life is one long obstacle course. If superheroes are shaped by their environments, then the savannah is one of the most intense training grounds on Earth. After that, we'll step back in time and uncover the history of the Maasai. Where did this people come from? How did they spread across East Africa? And why did colonial powers both fear and admire them? From epic cattle raids to clashes with European armies, the Maasai story has more action than a Marvel movie. Then we'll roll into the modern history of the past 2 centuries. Colonization, land loss, modernization. These forces reshaped Maasai life dramatically. Yet, the Maasai have clung to their traditions with a resilience that feels superhuman in itself. Their spears may have been traded for cell phones in some places, but the heartbeat of their culture refuses to fade. Finally, we'll arrive at today, where the Maasai stand at a crossroads. On one side, globalization and technology. On the other, their ancestral traditions, rituals, and connection to the land. Some Maasai now go to university, work in cities, or become politicians, but many still practice age-old customs that make outsiders shake their heads in disbelief. The Maasai are living proof that in a world obsessed with superheroes on screens, entire communities of them walk the earth for real. So, tuck yourself in. As the sounds of the savannah echo through your imagination, crickets chirping, distant drums carrying across the plains, we're about to wander into a world where survival itself feels like a legendary training montage. By the end of tonight's journey, you'll see why living the Maasai lifestyle would push you to your limits, sharpen your spirit, and maybe, just maybe, make you feel like you could leap tall buildings in a single bound. When people imagine superheroes, they often think of capes, secret lairs, or radioactive spider bites. But if you step into Maasai country, you'll find that real-life strength doesn't need science fiction. It's woven directly into daily life, from the way people eat to how they raise their children to the challenges they face from the moment they can walk. The Maasai, spread across southern Kenya and northern Tanzania, are famous for their tall, lean builds, their red robes called shukas, and their warrior spirit. But these outward images are just the surface of a much deeper and more complex culture. To understand why their way of life feels like a superhero training camp, you have to start by looking at their people. The Maasai are a semi-nomadic people. That means they don't stay rooted in one place forever, nor are they endlessly wandering. Instead, their lives revolve around cattle herding, moving where grass and water are available. To the Maasai, cattle are far more than just animals. They are life itself. Cows are currency, food, status, and even spiritual connection. In fact, one of the most famous sayings among the Maasai is that cattle are the gift of God. They measure wealth not in cars or bank accounts, but in how many cattle a family owns. It may sound simple, but this connection to livestock is at the center of everything, and it shapes their days in ways most of us couldn't imagine. Take diet, for example. The Maasai diet has baffled outsiders for decades. Traditionally, it's built around three things: milk, meat, and blood. Yes, blood, cow's blood to be exact. On special occasions or when someone is sick, fresh blood is drawn from the neck of a cow, mixed with milk and drunk as a source of strength. It's not just about survival. It's about honor, resilience, and nourishment in a land where farming is nearly impossible. Imagine sipping a protein shake at the gym and then realize the Maasai version has been around for centuries, without blenders or brand names, and it's designed for warriors in training, not casual workouts. Outsiders sometimes flinch at this idea, but for the Maasai, it's perfectly normal, even sacred. Their entire lifestyle is built around testing and pushing limits. From a young age, boys are taught endurance. They herd cattle across long distances under the blazing African sun, barefoot, learning to read the land, spot danger, and protect their herd. Girls, meanwhile, are raised to manage households, care for children, and take on responsibilities that require equal resilience. It's not a soft childhood. It's one where every day is preparing you for adulthood. In a sense, it's a training montage that never really ends. And then there are the rituals. The Maasai are famous for their rites of passage, ceremonies that mark the transition from one stage of life to the next. Perhaps the most dramatic is the transition into becoming a moron or warrior. For generations, boys around the age of 15 were circumcised in a public ritual without flinching, without crying out, without even moving. To show weakness was considered shameful. From there, they would live together in separate warrior villages, learning how to fight, hunt, and defend their people. At one time, this training included lion hunts, where killing a lion single-handedly was seen as the ultimate proof of bravery. While modern laws and conservation efforts have mostly ended this practice, the stories remain legendary. It's like hearing the backstory of a comic book hero, only it's all real. If superheroes have uniforms, so too do the Maasai. Their shukas, the red and often plaid cloths they drape over their bodies, are more than just clothing. The color red is believed to scare away lions and symbolize strength and courage. Combined with beadwork, brightly colored necklaces, bracelets, and earrings crafted mostly by Maasai women, the clothing is as iconic as any superhero costume. Each piece of beadwork has meaning: white for peace, blue for energy from the sky, green for land and health, and red for bravery. When you see a group of Maasai together, it's almost like seeing a team of heroes lined up, each marked with the symbols of their community and values. But life among the Maasai is not all about glamour and strength. With resilience comes hardship. Healthcare is limited in many Maasai communities, and access to modern medicine is often difficult. Malnutrition can be a problem, especially as traditional food sources shift and modern pressures creep in. Women in particular face challenges, from childbearing in harsh conditions to navigating roles defined by strict traditions. And yet, within these challenges, you still find strength that feels superhuman. Women walk miles daily for water, carry heavy loads of firewood, and still maintain homes built from mud, sticks, and cow dung. To live as a Maasai means carrying the weight of survival on your shoulders, but doing it with pride and a sense of purpose. Language also plays a role in shaping their identity. The Maasai speak Ma, part of the larger Nilotic language family. It's a language filled with poetic expressions, often tied to the natural world around them. Singing and chanting are integral to ceremonies, with voices weaving together in harmonies that carry across the plains. Music is less about performance and more about connection between people, spirits, and the land itself. Imagine the sound of chanting warriors leaping high into the air in the famous Adumu dance, each jump a contest of endurance and strength. It's not just a dance, it's proof of stamina, of who can push themselves further, who can rise higher. Watching it, you understand why people compare the Maasai to superheroes. They aren't just moving, they're defying gravity again and again. Festivals and community gatherings bring the Maasai together in ways that showcase both their joy and resilience. Weddings, initiation ceremonies, and seasonal rituals are filled with dancing, singing, and feasting. At these times, beadwork and clothing are at their most elaborate, and the sense of belonging is at its strongest. For a people whose lives often involve harsh realities, droughts, conflicts over grazing land, diseases among cattle, these moments of celebration are powerful. They remind everyone that being Maasai is not just about enduring, but about thriving together. Geography also divides and unites them. The Maasai live in areas that stretch across modern political boundaries between Kenya and Tanzania. While colonial lines split their territory into two countries, the Maasai identity runs deeper than any border. Communities in Kenya might face different government pressures than those in Tanzania, but culturally they remain united. Differences exist, of course. Some Maasai are more modernized, embracing schools, jobs, and city life, while others hold tightly to traditional ways. In urban areas, younger Maasai might trade the shuka for jeans and t-shirts, blending tradition with modernity. But even those who leave often carry their identity with them, returning for ceremonies and family responsibilities. Outsiders have long romanticized the Maasai as noble warriors, frozen in time, untouched by modernity. The truth is much more complex. The Maasai are not museum pieces. They are real people, living in a world that constantly changes around them. Tourism has become a major influence, with visitors from around the world fascinated by Maasai culture. Some Maasai communities have embraced this, performing dances or opening their homes to travelers in exchange for income. Others resent the stereotypes and the intrusion, preferring to maintain their traditions on their own terms. Like any culture, there's tension between past and present, tradition and change. Yet what remains constant is the spirit of resilience. If superhero training is about learning to withstand the impossible, then the Maasai do it every day. They survive in environments most outsiders would find unbearable. They walk distances most of us wouldn't dream of. They live by rituals that demand courage, endurance, and discipline. And somehow, they manage to do it with joy, color, and pride. So when you think of the Maasai, don't just picture a tourist photo of a tall man in a red robe holding a spear. Picture the little boy walking 10 miles barefoot with his cattle, the girl hauling water under the blazing sun, the warrior leaping higher than physics should allow, the elder chanting songs that bind generations together. Picture a people whose daily life is closer to a superhero training camp than anything Hollywood could dream up. Because here, in the heart of East Africa, superheroes aren't born in laboratories or distant planets. They're shaped by cattle, community, and the endless plains. The story of the Maasai is impossible to tell without talking about the land they live on. Imagine stretching out across the wide plains of East Africa, endless golden grasses, acacia trees that look like they've been painted onto the horizon, and skies so vast they make you feel tiny. This is the Great Rift Valley, a geological scar that runs like a giant crack through the earth from Lebanon all the way down to Mozambique. The Maasai live right along this fracture, mostly in southern Kenya and northern Tanzania. And if there were ever a landscape designed to shape superheroes, this would be it. First, let's talk geography. The Maasai homeland spans roughly 160,000 square kilometers, an area larger than Greece. It's a region of contrasts, rolling savannas, volcanic mountains, deserts, and fertile valleys. You can stand in a Maasai village and see herds of cattle moving across the plains, while just miles away, elephants wander, lions stalk, and wildebeest gather for their great migration. It's a place where humans and animals have always shared space, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. Survival here isn't about convenience, it's about adapting to whatever the land throws at you. The Rift Valley itself is no ordinary piece of geography. It's literally pulling apart, tectonic plates shifting, mountains rising, volcanoes still rumbling. Mount Kilimanjaro, the tallest peak in Africa, looms on the southern edge of Maasai territory in Tanzania, while Mount Kenya sits further north. Both are snow-capped giants towering above the dry plains, almost like guardians of the land. For the Maasai, these mountains aren't just landmarks, they're spiritual markers. The cycles of rainfall, the movement of animals, even the traditions of when to plant or move cattle are all tied to this dramatic landscape. Now, if superheroes need training grounds, then the Maasai got handed one of the toughest. The climate here swings from one extreme to another. Rainy seasons can bring sudden, heavy downpours that transform dusty land into a carpet of green. But just as quickly, droughts return, leaving rivers dry, grass brittle, and cattle thin. To survive here is to live with uncertainty. You wake up one day to abundance and the next to scarcity. For the Maasai, this constant battle with nature is part of what builds their endurance. Imagine having to walk 20 miles just to find water during a dry season. That's not a workout routine. That's daily life. The people here divide their land by altitude and vegetation. Higher areas, closer to the mountains, are cooler and more fertile, good for grazing cattle. Lower areas are hotter, more arid, and harder to survive in. Families move their livestock back and forth, adjusting constantly to find balance. This mobility isn't just practical, it's cultural. Being Maasai means being flexible, able to pack up and move when the land demands it. For outsiders, moving every few months might sound exhausting, but for the Maasai, it's second nature. Wildlife is another huge part of the Maasai environment. Living alongside lions, leopards, hyenas, elephants, and buffalo isn't something most of us deal with daily. But for the Maasai, it's always been reality. Historically, warriors gained status by confronting these animals. Lion hunting, now largely banned to protect the species, was once the ultimate test of bravery. Facing down a lion with nothing but a spear? That's as close to superhero training as it gets. Even today, while they don't hunt lions anymore, the Maasai still share their land with predators, and protecting their cattle requires vigilance, courage, and teamwork. The relationship with cattle and wildlife creates a delicate balance. On one hand, the Maasai depend on their herds for food, wealth, and tradition. On the other, conservationists view Maasai land as critical to preserving some of Africa's most iconic animals. This has led to both cooperation and conflict. National parks like Serengeti and Maasai Mara, which border or overlap Maasai territory, are global treasures filled with wildlife. But for the Maasai, they can also mean restricted grazing land. Imagine trying to balance your own survival with the survival of entire species. It's a constant negotiation, one that requires wisdom and compromise. The Great Migration is one of the most dramatic natural events anywhere on Earth, and it passes right through Maasai country. Every year, nearly 2 million wildebeest, along with hundreds of thousands of zebras and gazelles, cross the Serengeti and Maasai Mara in search of fresh grass. The herds face crocodile-infested rivers, lions, and exhaustion. For the Maasai, watching this isn't just about spectacle, it's part of the rhythm of life. The migration dictates grazing patterns, tourism, and even spiritual beliefs. It's nature's version of an epic saga, unfolding annually in their backyard. Natural disasters have also shaped Maasai life. Drought is the most common, and it can devastate cattle herds, leading to hunger and hardship. There are also diseases, both for people and for animals. Rinderpest, a cattle plague, wiped out massive herds in the late 19th century, creating famine that left deep scars in Maasai history. In recent years, climate change has made rains more unpredictable, droughts more severe, and the struggle for survival even harder. For a people so tied to the land, the shifts in weather patterns feel like battles against an unseen villain, one tougher than any lion or rival tribe. But it's not just challenges. The geography provides beauty and strength too. The savanna, with its endless horizons, isn't just harsh, it's breathtaking. Sunsets here look like the sky is on fire, the entire world glowing orange and red. The acacia trees, often standing alone against the horizon, feel almost symbolic, resilient, enduring, shaped by the wind, but still upright. For the Maasai, the land isn't something separate from themselves, it's part of who they are. Superheroes often have a home base that shapes their powers. Batman has Gotham, Superman has Krypton. For the Maasai, their base is the land itself, a place that teaches resilience, strength, and adaptation from birth. Animals also play symbolic roles in Maasai culture. Lions represent bravery, cattle symbolize life, and birds often act as messengers. Living among so much wildlife isn't just about physical coexistence, it weaves into stories, songs, and spiritual beliefs. If you grow up with elephants walking past your home or hyenas howling at night, those animals become part of your imagination, shaping how you see the world. It's like being raised in a comic book universe where nature itself is filled with powerful characters, some allies, some enemies. Even the vegetation plays a role in daily survival. Medicinal plants are still used for healing. Roots, barks, and leaves turned into remedies for everything from stomach issues to infections. Knowledge of these plants is passed down through generations, a natural pharmacy built into the land. Outsiders might see a dry bush or a simple shrub, but to a Maasai elder, it could be a cure. This kind of knowledge is part of their superpower, the ability to survive where modern conveniences are scarce. And then there's the sheer physical demand of living here. Walking miles for water, tending cattle across wide plains, enduring the heat of the sun, all of it builds stamina. Outsiders train in gyms for endurance, running on treadmills or lifting weights. The Maasai train in real life, carrying water on their heads, chasing stray cows, or trekking through thorny terrain. Their geography doesn't allow for weakness. To live here, you must be strong, disciplined, and in harmony with your surroundings. But geography doesn't just shape the body, it shapes society. Villages, or maniatas, are traditionally built in circular patterns, with huts made of mud, sticks, and cow dung. The center of the village is reserved for cattle, protected at night from predators. This layout isn't random, it's practical, designed for survival in a landscape filled with dangers. The village itself is like a shield, a fortress, not unlike the bases you'd expect superheroes to build in hostile worlds. The Maasai also use their environment in creative ways. Spears are crafted for balance and reach, perfect for both defense and ceremony. Walking sticks double as tools and symbols of authority. Jewelry is made from local materials, not just for beauty, but for identity and communication. Every object, every design has purpose, often rooted in the land around them. Nothing is wasted because nothing can be wasted. Living in Maasai land is like being constantly tested by the elements. You learn to endure blistering heat, survive long droughts, share space with predators, and find beauty in scarcity. And the incredible thing is that instead of being crushed by these challenges, the Maasai have turned them into strength. Their resilience isn't about conquering nature. It's about coexisting with it, learning its patterns, and respecting its power. For the Maasai, the land is both a challenge and a teacher. It's harsh enough to demand strength, but generous enough to sustain life if you know how to live with it. And that's the superhero lesson hidden here. Real power doesn't come from fighting against everything, but from learning to adapt, endure, and thrive in the toughest of conditions. If geography was the gym that trained the Maasai, then history is the storyline that forged their identity. Every superhero has an origin story, and for the Maasai, that story goes back centuries to a migration that would forever set them apart. Long before they were known as cattle herders in the Rift Valley, the Maasai were part of a much bigger movement of peoples known as the Nilotic migrations. Originating around the Nile River region in what is now South Sudan, Nilotic groups gradually spread southward over generations, following rivers, grasslands, and the promise of grazing land for their animals. Around the 15th and 16th centuries, one branch of this great migration moved into what is today Kenya and Tanzania. These were the Maasai. They didn't come quietly. They came with cattle, with traditions, and with a way of life that would dominate the savannah. Imagine a group of tall, fearless herders pushing steadily southward, absorbing new lands, pushing aside rival groups, and leaving behind a reputation for fearlessness. To outsiders, they seemed almost invincible. To themselves, they were simply following the call of cattle, the animal at the center of everything in their world. Cattle weren't just food or wealth. For the Maasai, they were sacred. In their spiritual beliefs, given by the god Enkai, all cattle on earth were meant for them. That meant they had a divine right, maybe even a divine duty, to expand and claim herds wherever they roamed. Other groups they encountered often saw this as aggression, but to the Maasai, it was fulfilling their destiny. You could call it the original superhero code, except instead of defending Gotham or Metropolis, the Maasai were defending their cattle and their God-given right to them. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the Maasai had become one of the most feared and respected peoples of East Africa. Their warriors, known as Morans, were legendary. Standing tall, often draped in red shukas, cloth wraps, carrying spears and adorned with intricate beadwork, they were striking figures. But it wasn't just their looks that intimidated others. They developed a reputation for being fierce fighters who could raid cattle from neighbors and hold their own against formidable enemies. Entire communities knew that if the Maasai came riding or running across the plains, it was best to prepare for a fight. And here's where the superhero analogy deepens. Every young Maasai man went through an initiation to become a moron, a warrior. It wasn't about choice, it was about duty. Boys were circumcised in ceremonies that tested their courage. They weren't allowed to flinch or show pain. Afterward, they lived together in special warrior camps, training in the skills they'd need: herding, protecting, and yes, fighting. Think of it like a superhero academy, except instead of classrooms and laboratories, it was the open savannah. And instead of capes, they wore red cloaks. Their reputation as warriors also had a very real political impact. In the 19th century, the Maasai dominated trade routes that crossed East Africa. Caravans of ivory and slaves heading to the coast had to reckon with Maasai control. Some paid tribute, others risked attacks. The Maasai weren't an empire in the European sense. They didn't build cities or fortresses, but their dominance of the land gave them power, and everyone knew it. They were like the guardians of the Rift Valley, shaping regional politics simply through their presence. But no superhero story is without its challenges, and the Maasai faced plenty. By the late 19th century, two disasters struck almost simultaneously, testing their resilience like never before. The first was rinderpest, a cattle plague that spread through Africa in the 1890s. For a people whose entire livelihood depended on cattle, this was catastrophic. Herds were wiped out, leaving families without food, wealth, or status. It was as if someone had stripped Superman of his powers or taken away Thor's hammer. The Maasai faced famine, weakness, and despair. At the same time, colonial powers, first the Germans in Tanzania, then the British in Kenya, were carving up East Africa. The Maasai, who had long dominated their territory through force and reputation, suddenly faced enemies with rifles, maps, and treaties. The British in particular saw Maasai land as prime grazing territory for settlers. In 1904 and again in 1911, treaties were forced on Maasai leaders, pushing them off huge swaths of their ancestral land and relocating them to reserves. These weren't friendly negotiations. They were ultimatums backed by colonial power. Imagine being forced out of the training ground you had mastered for centuries, told you could no longer roam the wide plains that defined your very identity. For many Maasai, this period was the darkest chapter. Reduced herds, reduced land, and reduced power. It looked like their way of life might not survive. But if history shows anything, it's that resilience is part of the Maasai DNA. Instead of disappearing, they adapted. They rebuilt herds, they clung to traditions, and they found ways to maintain their culture even under colonial rule. Like a superhero knocked down by a villain, they refused to stay down. Through the 20th century, Maasai history intertwined with the broader story of Kenya and Tanzania. Both countries eventually gained independence, Tanzania in 1961, Kenya in 1963, and the Maasai hoped for some restitution. Some land was returned, but much remained in the hands of governments, private ranches, and conservation parks. Maasai leaders argued for their rights, but the balance of power had shifted. No longer feared raiders, they were now often portrayed as colorful symbols of African tradition, their warrior image repurposed for tourism brochures and safari posters. And here's the twist. While outsiders romanticize the Maasai as noble savages frozen in time, the Maasai themselves continued to evolve. They sent children to school, engaged in politics, and adapted to modern pressures. Some took jobs in cities, others embraced conservation partnerships that allowed them to benefit from tourism. Yet through all of it, the image of the warrior endured, not just as a costume for tourists, but as a reminder of a proud past that still shapes their present. One of the most fascinating aspects of Maasai history is how they resisted assimilation compared to many other groups. While colonialism and globalization erased or diluted countless traditions worldwide, the Maasai held firm to key elements of their identity: their red shukas, their beadwork, their dances and ceremonies. They're not relics in a museum. They're alive, still practiced today. And that continuity is itself a kind of superpower. Even conflicts over wildlife conservation tie back to this history. National parks like Serengeti and Maasai Mara were carved out of land the Maasai once freely roamed. When governments tried to restrict grazing to protect wildlife, Maasai communities resisted, pointing out that they had coexisted with lions and elephants for centuries. Their argument was simple: we protected this land long before you declared it a park. It's hard to argue with that. They were guardians before guardianship became policy. Of course, history isn't all about victories. The loss of land, the impact of colonial policies, and the challenges of modernization have left deep scars. Poverty is widespread among Maasai communities today, and many struggle with limited access to education, healthcare, and political power. But even here, history provides perspective. This is a people who endured plagues, droughts, invasions, and colonization, and came through still standing. That resilience, built over centuries, is what makes the superhero analogy so fitting. When you look at the arc of Maasai history, it's less about conquest and more about endurance. They didn't build empires with walls and palaces. They built strength in adaptation, in moving with the land, in surviving against odds that would break many others. Their history is written not in stone, but in the rhythms of cattle, the patterns of migration, and the stories passed down around fires. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Superheroes in comics often save the day with dramatic battles and flashy powers. The Maasai, by contrast, show that sometimes the greatest heroism is simply surviving with dignity in a world that constantly tests you. Their history isn't just about victories and defeats, it's about persistence, identity, and the refusal to give up what makes them who they are. By the time the colonial era ended and independence dawned in Kenya and Tanzania, the Maasai were no longer the feared warrior power they once were, but they were far from defeated. Their identity had been battered, their land reduced, and their political influence diminished. Yet the Maasai spirit proved unbreakable. This final chapter of their story is about how they carried their past into the modern age, refusing to vanish into history the way so many groups have. Instead, they adapted, endured, and in many ways became symbols of resilience, not just to themselves, but to the entire world. When Kenya gained independence in 1963 and Tanzania in 1961, the Maasai saw a chance for change. They hoped the end of colonial rule would mean the return of some of the vast grazing lands they had lost to settlers, ranchers, and wildlife parks. But the reality was more complicated. Newly independent governments were focused on building nations out of dozens of ethnic groups, balancing power, and modernizing economies. For the Maasai, who remained largely pastoral and rural, this often meant being sidelined. Promises of land restitution were limited. Instead, much of their ancestral territory remained under state or private control. National parks like Serengeti and Amboseli became jewels of conservation and tourism, but they also excluded Maasai herders from lands they had used for generations. This wasn't just a political or economic issue, it was existential. Cattle require land, and Maasai identity revolves around cattle. Losing grazing space meant shrinking herds, and shrinking herds meant a threat to the very foundation of their way of life. Some Maasai leaders resisted by lobbying. Others adapted by negotiating grazing rights near parks, while others looked for entirely new livelihoods. But even in adaptation, the centrality of cattle remained. Ask a Maasai elder today about wealth, and they may still measure it not in money, but in the size of one's herd. The mid to late 20th century brought new pressures too. Education spread across Kenya and Tanzania, and with it came opportunities and conflicts. Traditional Maasai values emphasized oral tradition, herding skills, and warrior training. Formal schooling, on the other hand, prepared children for jobs in cities, not the savannah. Some Maasai resisted sending their children, fearing cultural erosion. Others embraced it, seeing literacy and education as tools for survival in a rapidly changing world. Today, you'll find Maasai men and women in universities, in parliament, in business. Proof that even while holding tight to traditions, the Maasai are not frozen in time. They're navigating two worlds at once, a balancing act that's as challenging as anything in their warrior past. And let's not pretend this balance has been easy. Poverty remains widespread in many Maasai communities. Access to healthcare is limited, and diseases like malaria and malnutrition still take their toll. Women, in particular, face challenges from both tradition and modernity. In traditional Maasai society, gender roles were rigid. Men herded and fought. Women built homes and raised children. But as economies and expectations shift, Maasai women are increasingly pushing for education, autonomy, and leadership roles. The tension between honoring tradition and embracing equality is real, and it's one of the defining struggles of Maasai life today. Globalization has added yet another layer. In some ways, it has been a gift. Tourism has brought income to Maasai communities, as visitors flock to see their red shukas, beadwork, and dances. Maasai warriors leaping into the air in traditional ceremonies are now a common sight in travel brochures. But this visibility is a double-edged sword. While it provides income, it also risks reducing a living culture to a costume show for outsiders. Many Maasai wrestle with how to embrace tourism without letting it define them. Being turned into a symbol of exotic Africa is flattering to some, frustrating to others, and confusing to many. After all, superheroes don't want to be mascots. They want to be respected for who they are. Despite these struggles, there's no denying the resilience of Maasai traditions. Even today, initiation ceremonies, warrior dances, and elder councils continue. Young men still undergo rites of passage to prove courage. though thankfully, some of the harsher practices, like lion hunting, have been phased out due to conservation laws. Cattle still remain at the heart of their society, and when you meet a Maasai in the Rift Valley today, chances are he or she will still greet you with the same pride, dignity, and warmth that has defined their people for centuries. If the colonial period was about survival, the modern era is about adaptation. Some Maasai are blending tradition with innovation. Community-run conservancies, for example, allow Maasai to earn income from wildlife tourism while still grazing their cattle. Education initiatives are being led by Maasai themselves, ensuring schools respect cultural values while preparing children for the wider world. Even technology has found its place. Mobile phones, once unimaginable in the savannah, are now used to check market prices for cattle, send money, or coordinate grazing routes. It's a reminder that superhero training camp doesn't always mean spears and shields. Sometimes it means knowing when to adapt new tools to old ways. Politically, the Maasai continue to fight for recognition. Leaders and activists have pressed for land rights, for compensation where displacement occurred, and for greater representation in national politics. In Kenya especially, where ethnic identity often shapes politics, Maasai voices have been important in debates about conservation, development, and indigenous rights. They may no longer dominate the trade routes or strike fear into neighbors, but their moral authority as a people who have lived in harmony with the land for centuries gives their arguments weight. Yet perhaps the most powerful legacy of the Maasai in the modern world is symbolic. In an age where globalization tends to flatten identities, the Maasai stand as proof that tradition can endure. They remind the world that it's possible to embrace aspects of modernity without abandoning who you are. They've become icons, not because they ask to be, but because people around the world see in them a kind of authenticity that feels rare. Tall, proud, and unbent, they walk through airports in their red robes, turning heads, embodying both history and modernity in a single stride. When you zoom out and look at the arc of their story, it's hard not to see the superhero comparison come full circle. Every great hero faces loss. The Maasai lost land, cattle, power, and autonomy. Every great hero adapts. The Maasai learned to survive under colonialism, poverty, and globalization. And every great hero endures. Despite centuries of pressure, they're still here, still themselves, still proud. Maybe that's the true definition of a superhero. Not someone who saves the world with a cape or magical powers, but someone who withstands every storm, adapts to every challenge, and carries their identity forward when everything around them is trying to erase it. By that standard, the Maasai are superheroes indeed. And tonight, as you drift off to sleep, picture the wide savanna stretching out under a star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, a group of Maasai warriors are still training, still dancing, still herding cattle across the land their ancestors walked centuries ago. They may not fly or shoot lasers from their eyes, but their endurance, their courage, and their refusal to vanish make them something even rarer in today's world.